My mom was a 34-year teacher of Cassville Public Schools. She retired. At the time she retired, she was the longest serving employee at that school district. And so I've been a big supporter of public education my entire life, grew up in public schools. And with that being said, I also realize that, not every school is meant for every kid. I've got twins that are 5 years old that are born with special needs. And similar to Representative Hill, I'm going through a situation where we're having to try to figure out what the best decision for our kids is going to be. And the approach that I've taken is that I don't really care what I have to spend. I'm going to make sure that that I provide the absolute best that I can provide for them. But there's a lot of people in this state that are not able to make that same decision. And ESAs, in whatever form, hopefully, I think there are things I like about, we were involved in helping draft Representative Fitzpatrick's bill last year. I like components of Representative Chris Finelli's bill as well. I think there are parts of those that we're absolutely supportive of. At the end of the day, you all are the policy makers. You're the ones who are going to make the decisions in terms of what will be included and won't be included in any bill. And we'll certainly do our best to execute it if it passes. Just generally speaking, though, I do think it's an important thing to do, specifically right now, given the challenges that families are facing in light of coronavirus. And I encourage you guys to work together to do something. I do want to address, a couple of things. Representative Mackey made the point about the fund balance. This is a scholarship program, and one of the roles, depending on which function you go with, either the EAOs or the Treasurer's Office has to, award the scholarships. And in order to award scholarships, you have to know how much money you have. And so, one of the technical points that we've made is that we would like to see a year delay between the time where the fund gets loaded with, the people make the tax credit contributions and there's funding available so that we can know how much money we have available to award in scholarships. So otherwise we would be forced to make a projection which may be wrong, and then you'd be in the regrettable position of having to, rescind a scholarship award. And then another point, under Representative Fitzpatrick's bill, and I think given the decision of the Supreme Court, the Blaine Amendment decision, EAOs, if that's the direction, they may still serve a purpose. I think a lot of states had done that to deal with the Blaine Amendment issues, which presumably no longer exist. I do feel like the Treasurer's Office can manage, the functions that the EAOs are providing at a lower cost. But ultimately, the money under Representative Fitzpatrick's bill is in a state fund. General Assembly has the power through appropriations to appropriate transfers if it becomes a situation where they feel like the fund balance is too large. The General Assembly has the power to appropriate a transfer. I don't expect that would be the case. I think that the demand will probably exceed the supply of these scholarships in whatever form. And then the other thing I'd like to say, in terms of the magnitude of the program, wherever we end up, if it's $50 million, if it's $100 million, that would represent probably somewhere close to the average increase to the foundation formula during the time I was in the legislature on an annual basis. So, in terms of $100 million, 2 years ago, I'm going to not count last year because of there were a lot of additional appropriations for COVID, but the House Bill 2, which funds DESE, was a little over $6 billion in total, to give you an idea. So, if it was $50 million, they'd be less than 1% of the total funding to K-12. So I do think it's an important program. I do think the size of it and in the range of bills that I've seen from even at the largest end of that is reasonable. It's not, in my opinion, overly burdensome on the public education system, but it will provide opportunities for students who are in an environment that doesn't work for them to apply for a scholarship that would allow them some mobility and where they receive their education. So with that, thank you all for the time, and I'll try to answer any questions before I leave, if there are any.
Okay, want to remind all the witnesses, people testifying, please fill out a witness form before you testify. And any questions for the State Treasurer, Representative Mackey?
Mr. Chair, thanks for being here, Treasurer.
Absolutely.
Two questions. The shortest one first, in terms of the guessing game about how I get that folks who draft the bill are pretty optimistic about how many folks will use it, and folks who oppose the bill are thinking maybe it won't be so widely used. So why is there, as there often is in tax credit legislation that we see, why is there no sunset in this? Why not say, let's put this tax credit in place for 6 years, let's see how widely used it is, let's take this big leap, and if people are using it, we'll revisit it in 6 years, and great, we'll keep it going. Why are we specifically saying why are we specifically carving out a statute that's set up to do that and say, you know what, the train's leaving the station, we're diving in the deep end, and we're never looking back? Why would we do that?
Well, I think that one concern would be that once the priority in terms of who gets these, and most of the bills I've seen, is that once a student is in the program and has been given a scholarship, renewing that individual student's scholarships so they're not displaced from the school that they're in is the number one priority. And so if you have a student that receives a scholarship, gets moved into a new situation at whatever school they're at, and then 6 years from now the legislature were to, for whatever reason, due to a filibuster or due to, who knows what, I've been around the legislature for 8 years, and I know that there have been times when, things that should have happened or needed to happen didn't, and it would be really regrettable, in my opinion, if a student was forced to be removed from a school that they had been attending for 6 years and put back into a school that didn't work for them because of a failure to renew the program. Now, ultimately, the sunset, whether it exists or not, is a decision for you all to make. And, obviously, if you choose to put a sunset in the bill, that'll be what happens. And the treasurer's office, whether it's me or somebody else at the time, will obviously abide by that. But I guess if you're asking for my perspective on it, that would be what it would be.
Okay, thanks. In terms of the year delay, that's not in the bill, right? The year delay you talked about in terms of receiving the credits to figure out how much you have to dole out. That year delay is not in the bill, is it?
That's one of the notes that we've taken, and
I think it's a good note. I think it's a good idea.
So it's just we feel like, because like I said, we need to know how much money we have before we can award the scholarship. So that was a note that we've given to sponsors that would be hopefully included in a potential sub.
Okay. Now the question that I wish we had a whiteboard for. Can you please help explain the money flow? When is money leaving general revenue? When is money being awarded from the treasurer's office to the parents? When is it being paid from the parents to the school? Can you explain the process of that money flow?
So it depends. There's obviously varying forms of the bill, right? And
I'm talking specifically about 540.
Okay. So in 540, the money never comes to general revenue because it's a tax credit. So essentially what would happen is somebody would make a contribution to this fund. They would receive a tax credit from the Department of Revenue in exchange for that contribution. And then that money would be in the fund. I think the ideal scenario would be that, and I think in one version of one of the bills that we had worked on, that tax credits would begin being issued on July 1st of 2022. So it basically gives us the whole fiscal year, because this presumably wouldn't get signed until, wouldn't go into effect until August of 21. Right. So beginning July 22, begin issuing the tax credits, and then moving forward to be the following school year. So the school year of 23-24 is when we would expect to be able to award scholarships to students, and so that they could do that.
So would money not leave general revenue then? And money would be leaving general revenue in 21 and 22, and then when this 23 school year started, you would have.
It would be, so the first impact to general revenue would be in fiscal year 2023, which begins on July 1st, 2022. So in terms of the budget you guys are working on right now, wouldn't have an impact on that budget. It would be the next budget that would be impacted, from that perspective, would be fiscal year 2023, and then moving on to perpetuity. Once that flow begins July 1 of 2022 for the intensive general revenue, when the scholarships begin getting awarded, general revenue is not going to feel that because the money will have already been placed in the fund by virtue of people making the contributions. And then in terms of the money flowing, from the school, from the state to the parents at school, one of the, I think, things that we're looking at was in last year's bill looked at leveraging our 529 program. We have a program administrator that we work with that we can place this money into accounts essentially with them. They're used to, with our 529 plan, essentially, determining allowable distributions and things like that already. And so depending on what the distribution was for, I mean, we have the ability for that, for the program administrator to actually make a payment directly to the school, or however depending on how the bill gets set up, we'll need to promulgate rules essentially to make sure that, the way that the money is flowing, leaving the treasury and making its way to the school, that we're minimizing opportunities for fraud. Obviously, that's a concern that we would want to take seriously. We did, in terms of, there's always potential for unanticipated hurdles or roadblocks that occur, and so one of the things I think in the notes we put on Representative Fitzwater's bill was that we would like to have flexibility to use our 529 program or another account as we identify it being the appropriate vehicle to do this. So that would be, the kind of the money flow. If that hopefully answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Is there anything, just briefly, is there anything that would prohibit someone who's not a Missouri taxpayer from contributing to this fund?
Well, you'd have to have a Missouri tax liability in order to benefit.
I mean, yeah, sure. Forget the benefit. Obviously, they wouldn't benefit. Is there anything that would prohibit them from contributing?
No, I mean, as far as I'm aware, any fund in the Treasury is able to receive donations.
Okay. I mean, we've seen in other cases in other states where that's happened. So okay.
Yeah. So I mean, and there's also nothing that would prevent the General Assembly from transferring money to the fund. So the tax credit is the most obvious mechanism for getting money into the fund. Probably going to be the one that's most heavily used. But yeah, I mean, to the extent that there was a good Samaritan that had the altruistic idea of contributing to the tax credit fund without getting a tax credit, absolutely.
Okay. I mean, it's happened. So
yeah.
Okay, great.
I think it absolutely happened.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions for the treasurer?